Okay, part 2, chapter 5, chapter 6, actually, sorry. Okay. Okay. We're moving on to bone development. So how to grow bone. So let's see. Slideshow. Slide. Okay. Bone development is also known as ossification. Okay. The bone tissue formation, there's two ways to do this. One is membranous formation, growth from within a membrane. Okay, this usually occurs in the skull and a few other bones, but mostly the skull. Okay, the other bones develop initially from hyaline cartilage. Your first skeleton is usually a hyaline cartilage skeleton. Okay, so if you look at really primitive fish like sharks and stuff, they literally just have a cartilage skeleton. We developed a system of modifying that into solid bone. Okay, so this is intermembranous ossification. Is the development of flat bone in the skull of the fetus. Okay, generally skull bones are intermembranous ossification. Okay, and all the other ones are endochondrial ossification. Okay, so there's already a membrane there, okay, that surrounds where the head should be. What happens is these guys invade into the middle of the membrane, okay, and that is called an ossification center, okay? The beginning of where things ossify is the ossification center, okay? So now these guys start secrete, these are osteoblasts, and they start secreting osteoid. Remember, osteoid is the thing that forms solid bone. Okay. Now, next slide. Okay. Let me make sure I'm sharing my screen. Occasionally I screw that up. Okay. The next slide. Okay. You can see the osteoid forming and where the solid bone has formed. These guys turn into osteocytes. Okay. And there's more osteoblasts on the edges where they're forming more bone. And eventually, okay, you bring in a blood supply. One of the big differences between bone and cartilage is that bone has a blood supply. So you bring in a blood supply. Okay. And then you do this, right? You start building it more and more and more. Like one of the things about bringing in a blood supply, once you bring in a blood supply, this moves faster because now you have more nutrients, and so you can push the envelope harder, and so you can move it faster. Okay. All right. The more important type of ossification is endochondrial ossification. Okay. All bones, except some bones in the skull and clavicles. Okay. They're modeled on hyaline cartilage. So this, here, look. Okay. So here is ossification one. You have this blue piece, which is the hyaline cartilage. Okay. The hyaline cartilage has something called a perichondrium wrapped around it. Okay. The first thing that happens is the perichondrium starts to change a little bit and turn into something called a periosteum. Okay, and you can see that membrane right here. Okay, the center part of it, the very center in the middle of the diaphysis, will get invaded by cells. Okay, remember cartilage is mostly water, so it's easy to kind of wiggle its way into and chew its way into the center. And they form the primary ossification center. Okay, right in the middle of the bone. Okay, and as this process happens, the bone is actually growing longer in cartilage. Okay, so what happens next is the center of the diaphysis calcifies and develops a cavity. So you can see it turning into bone right in the center here. Okay. Next thing it needs is a blood supply. So you develop spongy bone here, now it's more solid spongy bone here, and you bring in a blood supply to the middle of the bone. That blood supply to the middle of the bone will bring nutrients. So now we can go further. Okay, so now you have a measuring cavity, you have compact bone now. Okay, you can't have compact bone at all without a blood supply. So you start to bring in the blood supply and then you form compact bone. Okay, now while you're doing that, you also send out little cells to the edges, okay, and they start forming bone and they start bringing in a blood supply, and that forms a secondary ossification center. The secondary ossification center always occurs in the epiphysis. Okay, so here's a secondary ossification center. There's a secondary ossification center. Okay, these are going to start to ossify. Okay, and now what happens this is right before you're born, and right as a childhood, all the way to adolescence. This is what your bone looks like. Okay, you have a little piece of articular cartilage here that will form the joint. So this surface, okay, will interact with this bone up top here. This curved surface will interact with this bone down here. Okay, if there isn't a bone, then there's not going to be like this curved surface down here. Okay, but most bones interact with many other bones, so there's only a piece of cartilage where they interact. Okay, there's going to be a piece of bone and then another piece of cartilage. This piece of cartilage is going to be important, and it's going to be called the epiphyseal plate. Okay. All right. In the epiphyseal plate of growing bones, okay, the cartilage is organized for quick and efficient growth. Okay, so here, okay. I'll explain the other two slides. I'll go back and explain them, but I want to show you a picture first. Okay, so this picture is a picture of a child. Okay, the knee of a child. Okay, and I know immediately how that this is a child because I can see. Sorry. Okay, I can see this little space there and that little space there. That is the epiphyseal plate. Okay, so bone, cartilage, bone. Okay, and here you can see the fibula has the same thing. There's a little plate right there. Okay, so this is, if I take out one of these things and blow it up, this is what it looks like. Okay, so I have a resting zone where the cartilage is normal. I have a proliferating zone where the cartilage is growing. Okay, and it's growing so fast, it's undergoing mitosis so fast that these things are literally dividing into little stacks, and they look like little stacks of coins. Okay, that area is called the proliferation zone. Okay, the next area is called the hypertrophic zone. The hypertrophic zone is where the cartilage cells start to enlarge. Okay, hypertrophic, large growth. Okay, so the cells enlarge, get bigger. Okay, the calcification zone. Okay, the cartilage becomes calcified, and that actually kills the cells. Okay, so now the cartilage is dying, but you still have the remnant of the cartilage in which you use to form bone. Okay, so what happens, okay, is you form cartilage on one side and cartilage dies on the other side. And as long as you keep forming cartilage and it keeps dying, and you keep forming cartilage and it keeps dying, you end up just growing taller. Okay, that's how the long bone lengthens. Okay. All right. Now, what happens as you get older, okay, is that this side slows down. This side doesn't. So what happens? You get taller and taller and taller, but eventually this side will catch up to this side, and it'll seal. Okay. Once these two things come together, there is no more epiphyseal plate, and there's no more cartilage, and there's no more cartilage. That means the long bone has finished growing. Okay, that means you can no longer grow taller. Okay, most of you guys are women. Okay, so you guys will be done growing by 17. Okay, and I'm almost 100% certain, I'm about 99.9% certain that none of you guys have grown any taller since you guys are 17. Okay, if you guys are males, you could grow, you start growing later. Okay, your growth spurt starts later, which leads to that inevitable awkward like fifth grade picture where all the women are taller than all the boys. Okay, but you catch up and you exceed that and you can grow until 21, 22, possibly 23, okay? All right. So again, once that seals, okay, you can't grow anymore, so. Okay. Okay, I will switch a little bit. I will show you one famous character. Okay, hold on 1 second, actually. We'll stop recording. All right, hopefully you guys didn't realize I spent like 5 minutes trying to find this picture, but this is Game of Thrones. Okay, so you can see Tyrion Lannister right here. If you guys haven't watched the show, you should watch it. It's freaking awesome. All right, but you can see this guy right here. Okay, is a dwarf, and he's considerably shorter than his supposed siblings, nephew, father, not related. Okay, but you can see how small he is. Okay, this is a dwarf. Okay, his issue. Okay, if you look at the size of his head, the size of his head is about the same size as all the other ones. Okay, that's intermembrane ossification. That doesn't play a role, but his arms and legs, okay, fingers are considerably shorter, and that's because he suffers from something called achondroplasia. Okay, the piece of cartilage that lengthens and makes you taller, that sealed off very quickly when he was young. And therefore, he wasn't able to grow very much before it sealed. And once it's sealed, he can't grow anymore. So if you look at his proportions, his head looks the same, but his body and especially his arms and legs, are considerably different, like shorter. Okay. All right. So. Okay. In addition to bones growing longer, they also have to grow wider, okay, to support your weight as you get bigger, okay? And the way it does that Okay, it's pretty simple. Okay, remember bones are hollow. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, okay, there is your bone. Okay, you have an inner circle, right, and outer circle. So this is your compact bone. Okay, as you get bigger, the bone needs to grow wider and accommodate you. So I'm gonna change that into different colors. So the new bone will be blue. So now I'm gonna grow bigger. Okay, so now I'm bigger. But now I'm also heavier, which is a problem. I don't want my bone to be super heavy. Okay, so now to be lighter, I need to chew away at the inner ring here and make a bigger inner ring as well. Okay, and then eat away at the inner ring as well. So I eat away at the inner ring and grow more in the outer ring, and therefore now I'm bigger and stronger, but not much heavier. Okay, all right. So okay, so the osteoblasts add bone tissue to the external surface. The osteoclasts remove bone surface from the internal surface. Okay, and that is apositional growth. Okay, we'll skip the hormones. We'll actually cover the hormones later. Okay, bone is a dynamic tissue, so 500 milligrams, so half a gram of calcium can leave or enter adults every day. Okay, um, like I said, bone is very dynamic, so you can actually lose bone very quickly. Okay, the cancellous bone or spongy bone is replaced every 3 to 4 years. The compact bone is replaced every 5 to 10. Okay, um, so you have this dynamic thing process going on. Okay, so you can build bone and you can lose bone. Okay, um, this is bone deposition and reabsorption. Okay, this happens all the time. In fact, in the 1960s, one of the things that happened was that we had a space race with Russia. And during this space race, we were sending people into space for months at a time. And what there isn't in space is gravity. Okay, so without the pressure of gravity, they were floating in space. Okay, and what happened ultimately was when they came back to Earth, they had all these bone problems. They weren't bearing any weight on their bones, so their bones were reabsorbed, and all of a sudden they were getting fractures and injuries, bone injuries that they otherwise wouldn't. Okay, so bone deposition and reabsorption is important. Okay, this occurred even in the elderly. Okay, so a lot of you guys are working with elderly populations or have elderly people in the home, and one of the things they need to do is actually continue weight bearing exercise. So lift weights, even if it's not a lot of weight, it will strengthen the bones. Okay, and at least prevent them from weakening quite as fast. Okay, all right. Simple repairs we'll skip. Okay, basically what happens is if you break a bone, the fiber starts reconnecting first. Okay, and then what happens is the bone fills in, and because every time you put weight and exercise, it puts pressure and weight on the bone, and the bone is remodeled according to the weight profile that you put on it. Very quickly, a broken bone returns to normal. Okay. Okay. So the different type of fractures we'll skip. Okay. Osteoporosis. So let me explain what osteoporosis is. Okay. So this is osteoporotic bone. This is normal bone. See the holes here? Okay. So every time your body needs calcium. So your body always needs a level of calcium that's maintained in the bloodstream. That's homeostasis. Every time it drops below that, okay, you reabsorb, you break down bone to release the calcium and reabsorb the calcium, keep the levels up. Okay, you do that too often, you go into osteoporosis. That's why you need calcium. Okay, you need to take calcium, and this is especially true of women who are postmenopausal. Okay, postmenopausal women have very hard time putting on bone, and therefore every time you lose bone, it doesn't come back. Okay, it's due to the estrogen supplements. The estrogen changes, profile changes because they're no longer secreting estrogen. Okay, the other thing about women is their hips are shaped differently. Okay, women's hips. We'll go over that in the next chapter or in 2 chapters. Women's hips are designed a little bit differently because they have to push a baby out, so their hips are a slightly different shape and there's less weight bearing, and so you suffer that. Plus, women have less bone on average than men because women are smaller. Okay, they get osteoporosis much more often, and for them, it's much more a problem because you can easily shatter your hip, break your hip, and that ultimately leads to very fast decline. Okay. Okay. So basically, if you're there or closer there, you should take calcium supplements. Okay. Okay. Rickets, osteoporosis. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that ends this presentation. We'll continue on with chapter 7. Okay.